All right, and we are live. Welcome back, everybody. ITRBoxing here to give you the weekend recap, and I would say one of the busier shows we've had in quite some time. Certainly in the few months since we've been back on the air, Nibs. Um, I guess, like we said in the pre-show, we'll go kind of chronologically. But the first big fight of the week was Oslasi Iglesias getting the seventh round stoppage of Vladimir Shishkin. Shishkin, a guy who was a long time prospect, probably somebody who stayed in that prospect incubator a little too long, but was unbeaten. In my view, got the short end of the stick against William Skull. And Iglesias now, beating, I would say, his fourth, contender level opponent in a row, if not a fellow prospect. And passing these tests, and again, Shishkin's the kind of guy, if Iglesias wasn't the real deal, this would have been a real tough fight because Shishkin can do a lot of different things. And at the moment, especially at 168, Iglesias is really making himself a standout right at this moment.
I think you have to pay attention, right? Like, no matter what your personal feelings are about any boxer, when they start to put together some impressive wins against impressive opponents, right? Or just wins in general against guys that most people think they should lose to. I mean, Shishkin was what? He was undefeated before this, right? So this is his first loss, I think. So, and I get it. Iglesias is only 13-0, but he's 13-0 beating Shishkin, who most people thought were going to win this fight. And not only did he beat him, but he stops him, right? That's impressive because you're talking about it. Again, look at the losses, or he did have the one loss. Am I right? It's just
The
he's
only
got the one
loss
loss.
was the fight for the WBA with William Skull.
He's got that loss. Most of us think he won, right? Or deserves better. And then he gets stopped by a guy. Most people thought he should have been able to walk through. So, or at least get through. I shouldn't say walk through, but get through. And he gets stopped. Iglesias, bro, I think he's right time, right place. You know,
Dude,
and
super middleweight's kind of having like a reawakening right now with, Benavidez and Morrell leaving. It was like, who's going to be the guy? Hamza Shiraz having that huge statement against Edgar Berlanga. I think that Diego Pacheco, even though that last fight he was more technical, he's obviously one of the best guys in the division. I think it's undeniable. And now you got this guy who I would say of all of the guys I'm naming, the least amount of people know. And we'll talk about why that is in a sec. But I'm looking at his box rec, bro. First round knockout against Marcelo Coceres, who gave Billy Joe Saunders all he could handle, gave Berlanga all he could handle. That's a durable, tough guy. Stops him in the first round. Evgeny Shvedenko stops him in the first round. Petro Ivanov, who was unbeaten prospect as well. A lot of people were high on him. Stops him in the fifth round. And now beating Shishkin, a legitimate top 10 guy in his weight. Like I'm excited to see all these big, strong, young, hungry guys taking over the weight class. And in much the way that I was frustrated with Floyd at the time, unfortunately, I don't think these guys are going to make their name fighting Canelo, but I hope that they can make their name fighting each other because I think there's some classics a brewing.
and the beautiful thing about boxing right now is, well, at least in recent history, we're getting fights that we haven't been getting in the last, couple of years. Last couple of years, these guys have been willing to make those fights, right? You've seen a lot more prospects willing to risk their for fighting the good competition. Whereas opposed to, hey, let me fight this cab driver, and then get a title fight the next day. These guys have been much more willing, at least recently, to fight each other. So I think you're right. I think we're going to get some exciting stuff. I'm excited about Iglesias too. I mean, for all the reasons you just said. But again, you just look at, it's not just that he's stopping these guys. His stoppages haven't slowed down because his level of opponent has increased. It's actually gotten better,
No,
right?
it's like Moses Italma, where he's just sort of passing. He's not just passing the tests; he's passing with flying colors. So you start to wonder, what's the ceiling on this guy? And at the moment, I just think the biggest issue that Iglesias is going to have that a lot of Cuban fighters before him have had is just exposure. He's fighting on punchinggrace.com. No disrespect to them, but it's not a website, me as a boxing guy, that I was even familiar with. So anytime you get a fight on a random website, I just don't think you're putting the fighters in the best position to get seen. So then you ask, well, why are they on a random website? Well, they're on a random website because the Top Rank deal is over. And I may not have all the facts straight on this, but the broad strokes are that Eye of the Tiger sort of went with Top Rank, right? Top Rank was like the American or world distribution of their broadcasts. And so now Eye of the Tiger, the Canadian promoter doing this fight, no longer has the ESPN deal as well. And so it's really indicative of where the sport is right now, right? We're in the random website. I don't know where this fight's going to be on era. You can't just hop on ESPN or DAZN and know that it's going to be there. And I think that a lot of talented fighters like Osleis Iglesias are not going to get the attention that they deserve in this climate.
It's it's like it's like being an honor student in pre-algebra. Like you look at all these guys, they've got an amazing amount of talent, but there's nowhere for them to be, right? Like, hey, I should be taking this class. Well, you can take that class, but we're going to put you next to, the special education room because we don't have anywhere else to put you. You know what I'm saying? Or you've got to sit in the nurse's office and take your SATs. Like, this is what it feels like right now, where, you've almost, and I'm not promoting anybody, but at the same time, you've almost got to depend on YouTube to watch boxing nowadays, right? Because it's like, I don't know what streaming service any of these guys are on. It's not being promoted properly, like you said, right? It's almost 100% dependent upon the fighters themselves promoting these fights on their social media pages. And it's like, if you're not personally following a lot of these fighters, or you're not following the promoter themselves, you're missing out. Whereas before, hey, I could just be watching ESPN or watching a television show and see a commercial for this or that fight. And it didn't even have to be that network's fight.
Or you just know, or you just know, oh, Friday Night Fights is on, or you just know, oh, HBO is doing 2 cards a month. So this is the week. I don't know who's on the undercard, but I know it's going to be of a certain. That's where, it's going to be of a certain quality. And I got to tell you, man, this is a great segue. I think you're going to like this segue, bub. That's where ProBox gets it right for me every time, is being, yeah, you like that. I like it. Yes, sir. That's where ProBox TV gets it right for me. And that's not, then now I'm being serious. They are making boxing accessible to the modern fan because they have, they're paid, their paid ProBox TV app that's very cheap, that allows you to watch the fights for commercial free. And then they have their fight streaming on YouTube that tens of thousands of people are watching every week right now. And I just think that of all of the entities in boxing, that ProBox is doing the most earnest promotion in terms of developing young talent, making really legitimate 50-50 matchups for their contenders. And there's more and more of them fighting there now. And it's just it's a product that, as like a boxing person for the last 20 years, I would say is one of the most appealing right now.
It's everything we wanted the zone to be, right? Like, and what the zone promised it was going to be to boot, right? The zone promised to be this, 100% all access pass to all these, not just the big pay-per-view fights, but just, regular boxing and combat sports in general content, right? And then it fell off into, well, yeah, you can get some of that, but then not only are we going to make you pay for the monthly subscription, but you're going to have to pay for the bigger fights in addition to that.
Yeah.
ProBox gives you one price. They give you amazing fights, right?
They give you one price or no price. just for the price of logging onto YouTube, which you also don't have to have an account for, you can just watch their fights where they have advertisements that play next to the fight. They don't take over the fight. So you can still watch. There's just an ad on the side of your screen that takes the audio. And I think what they're doing is it puts a magnifying glass to something. When I talk about buck for buck, I'm paying $30 a month for the zone, and I'm paying whatever 199 for Pro Box. The only thing that Pro Box never did was make big promises, right? They never said we got Canelo, we got Anthony Joshua, we got Ryan Garcia. They said we're making good fights, and I think they've delivered on that. You know, and I hope on some level that they can grow, into not into something that becomes inaccessible, but just comes increasingly accessible.
It reminds me of the Spanish networks that do boxing weekly, right? Like the Telemundos and all of those, right? And for people who are Spanish speakers or live in Mexico, they'll know what I'm talking about. These channels have boxing on every week religiously, right? It doesn't matter whether there's a big name, no names, doesn't matter that. There's going to be some boxing on, right? And then in Mexico, like if you live in Mexico, they don't charge for pay-per-views because their country can't afford it. People can't afford it, right? But what they do is during those pay-per-views, they play commercials in between rounds. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, okay, bet I can watch a fight and all I got to do is watch a commercial in between rounds when most people tune out anyway, or they go to the bathroom or go get their popcorn or whatever. I think that's a great model because you get to see your favorite fighter without having to shell out money for something you probably didn't have to give for it anyway. It's one of those things I keep telling people, man. You look at the
And to
model
just
on
run
how.
through that,
No, go ahead.
you got glitchy, but we're to run through that Pro Box card. Renee Tellez-Giron, getting in White, a pretty surprising performance to me. I've liked Jordan White in the past, and Tellez-Giron, gave Floyd a fight. I sort of expected, but White, it felt like he got caught early, and the entire time it was actually kind of surprising that he wasn't able to get him out of there. It was much like Jojo Diaz and Regis Prograis. It was like if you just put your foot on the gas that one little bit, but he didn't quite have the work rate and the tempo. But a tremendous win for him. The big standout on the night for me was Suleiman Sagawa, who got a stoppage win over Brian Acosta. He had just had an absolute classic with, God, what was that guy's name? I'll think of it in a second. The guy that just Ramon Cardenas. And Sagawa, to me, after the win over Villa, the razor thin loss to Shushu Carrington, and now beating Acosta, a world ranked guy. I mean, this guy is a barn counter, and certainly an ITRBoxing type of fighter, where he's just out here taking hard fights, man. And now he's become somebody who's a genuine world level fighter. Did we lose Nibs as well?
I'm back.
Guys, we're having technical difficulties this week. It's been a long time. All right, good. Listen, bro. Technical difficulties used to be a weekly occurrence for us, if you'll recall. So we're just two guys out here doing our best, folks. Just real quick, I want to highlight Elijah Flores. I want to highlight Ben Johnson, a couple of the other young guys in this card. A lot of great talent. And a big shout out to Elijah Flores, local from out my way, Bronx, New York. So shout out to him. Let's get into this Pat McCormack card, man, because Pat McCormack's a pretty serious guy. Olympic silver medalist. You might have thought that his would be a career that had a faster trajectory, but he too is being fast tracked, like Keyshawn Davis, like so many of these great Olympians, Lomachenko. What were your thoughts on seeing Pat McCormack, and how do you feel about his progression?
He passed the test. We always talk about guys getting the step up fight and then not passing it or barely skating by, with a 70. You know what I mean? He passed the test with flying colors, in my opinion.
I think the main criticism of him right now is at times maybe he's not as active as he could be, but I just think he's a measured the way I interpret that is he's just a measured guy. He's somebody you're not going to shake him out of his tempo, you're not going to shake him out of his thing, and he finds his spots. He kind of fights in bursts a little bit, but he's so difficult to hit that I just think, I look at him potentially, not that he's at this level yet, but I look at him at like Shakur, where, yeah, sometimes Shakur is not putting the work rate out that you want to see from him, but Shakur is gonna fight in a measured way that wins rounds. And you can say you don't like that if you like, but it's effective and it's going to be difficult to beat.
I would say you could say that, but I think that McCormack has that thing in him where you know he could finish a fight if he wants to. You know what I mean? I think that you know the knock on Shakur is that he can't always finish the fight. Even if he wants to finish the fight, he just doesn't have it in him sometimes, that extra gear. I think McCormack does, and I think that he'll get to a point where he'll get that, he'll get over that hump. But I like everything I see about him. He, defensively responsible, but he puts that shit on, bro. Like he's got some pop.
He's got some pop and he's got some accuracy and he's sharp. He knows how to place his shots. He's got a really nice variety. Troy Williamson on this card getting I guess you could call it an upset. I over Dickinson. I don't know that I necessarily saw it as an upset, but he was coming off the loss to Jahai. He's had some tough fights over the years. Tough fight with Ted Cheeseman. There's a lot of punishment on that odometer, but he just kind of veteraned his way through that one. It felt like.
To be honest with you, it if I hadn't known that he was supposed to be the underdog, I wouldn't have seen it that way either. When you look at the two guys coming into the ring, I mean, the other guy looked like he wasn't even in shape for the fight. Dickinson looked like,
He missed weight by like several pounds.
yeah, like he was way thicker, than he should have been, and it showed. And like you said, I think Williamson is just a pro, right? He's a pro's pro. He got through it because he's a pro, and Dickinson just looked like he was. I don't necessarily say he was throwing in the towel, but he didn't look like he wanted to be there, and it showed. And then he got stopped in a pretty impressive fashion, in my point of view. So hats off to Williamson, man, for getting I thought it was very impressive.
It didn't seem like Dickinson quite had the conditioning. And as a young fighter, having that conditioning, having that discipline, sometimes talent isn't enough. You could see his ability, you can see his power, there's things you can see, but that's when you see the difference, because Williamson, albeit maybe a diminished contender, has that conditioning and has a baseline of what's acceptable. Yeah.
He looked in great shape. Like he looked like he was training for a title fight. Like, you know what I mean? I wonder, not to be too hard on the young fella, maybe it was a calculated risk because Williamson does have power. He does have the conditioning. Maybe they thought if they came in a little bit heavier, might be able to take some shots better than they did. I don't know. I'm not in that camp, but that was the only thing I could think of logically why he came in so heavy. Um, I mean, extremely out of shape. It didn't look heavy. It looked out of shape. Like, how you see some guys that come in, they're heavy, but you can still tell that they look in shape, right?
Sure.
This didn't look like. This looked like a guy who just got off the couch eating donuts. You know what I mean? So, it showed. I think, like you said, to his point, Williamson is a veteran. He's a pro's pro. He came in fabulous shape because he got touched up a couple of times, but he
Hell
was
yeah,
he,
that's why I would them watching it, and I'm like, I don't know how a guy who's already taken this much punishment is going to get through at this tempo. And as it turned out, he got through it better than Dickinson did.
conditioning can work wonders, man.
Yeah. The last one on that card that I want to just give some shout outs to, man, Sandy Ryan. We talk about fighters who just take hard fights. I think sometimes the fellas get more credit on this than the women do. But Sandy Ryan's 12 fights into her career and has had like 8 world title fights. And we
Yeah.
see a relatively pedestrian 8-3-1 record that's really, it's just not telling the whole story, man. It's not telling the whole story. And I felt like she showed some veteran savvy and some layers to her game in this one, taking on unbeaten Jade Grierson, who showed up to fight, who was not there to follow a script of any kind, viewed herself as a prospect. And I thought she looked, at times I think Sandy has looked like a little bit one-dimensional, a little bit too front foot. She was showing head movement. She was fighting on the back foot. I mean, she was like, all right, I'm going to give you a full buffet of what I'm capable of in the ring. And you can see me do a little of this and a little of that. And I thought it was super impressive, especially in light of coming off 2 straight losses to Michaela Mayer.
I mean, look, let's be really clear. And I say this about any boxer, not man or woman. When everybody you fight is at the top of the game, right? It's like people who look at Lomachenko and they're like, well, he's got some losses. He only got so many fights. You have to understand every fight that man has had has been against top level competition. He's not fighting. There's zero bums on Lomachenko's ledger. Zero. There's you can't find one, right? Same thing with Sandy Ryan. I'm not putting her in the Lomachenko, realm. I'm just saying, you look at her resume. There are zero bums, bro. There are no
Listen,
slip ups.
her fourth fight's a title fight. Her fourth fight's a title fight, right? Now she lost that fight, but when you're already at that level in your third fight and you're already taking that type of competition, you're not going to be unbeaten. There's just no way around it, right? Like you fight at that level for long enough, you're going to get a bad decision, or you're going to have a fight that's a flip a coin fight that doesn't go your way, or you're going to have an injury or you're going to fight a great of your era, and they're going to figure it out a little bit more the second time, and now you got to come back, and retool. And I think she did a beautiful job of that.
And when you look at her most recent opponent, Grayson, as basically her least worthy opponent, that tells you something. She's fighting an undefeated young fighter, and that person, it just so happens to be the least good fighter that she's fought, right?
Yeah.
That tells you everything you need to know. And yeah, is Sandy Ryan gonna put people to sleep? Is she out here, dominating maybe like Clarissa and all those other girls? No, but she is going. If you are a fan of boxing, like the skill of boxing, Sandy Ryan's a great watch, man. She gives you all the tools, just like you said, and she gets clear victories. It's not like, you know, again, unless she's stepping up in there against, the class of the class, you know, it is what it is. But Sandy Ryan's always a fun watch for me.
And not for nothing, it's also her first win since that win over Terry Harper, about a year and a half more, nearly a year and a half ago. And having, a little time off after fighting Michaela, having those 2 fights, it was just super impressive. But now let's move on to the real meat and potatoes of the week, for me at least. Eduardo Nunez in an absolute classic with Christopher Patufo Diaz. Another one of those guys like Suleiman Sagawa, like Sandy Ryan. Chris Diaz has just been out here taking tough fights for a decade now and has yet to come up with a world title win, and which is unfortunate. I can't think of too many guys as good as him that never got to a title, but a lot of those guys have a path cleared for them to some extent, meaning, the cards are built around them. They're never the B side. there's a path to some extent laid out for some fighters, and then other fighters don't have that path laid out. And he's been one of them. He had to take on Shakur Stevenson. He had to take on Emmanuel Navarrete. He had to get the short end of the stick against Isaac Dogboe. He had to lose a decision against Henry LeBron where, he's got this young guy in front of him and he dominates the last 3 rounds. It's just been a tough run for Chris Diaz. And I just hope the fans can really appreciate what he's out here doing, because Eduardo Nunez, he's a huge puncher. He's laying everybody out before this fight. He clearly has some boxing ability and is coming into his own as one of, if not the most exciting guys at 130 pounds. And I guess the last point that I'll make on this one, Nibs, is the scoring. I would love to know how you felt about the scoring on this one. I thought Diaz was super effective. I thought he won 7 rounds of the fight, and I scored it a draw. And then I hear the scores, and it's 117, 109, 116, 110. And my heart broke for him, man, because it's like, damn, Diaz puts in another classic performance that the judges just aren't watching. And I really felt for him. As much as I had no issue with Nunez getting the win, you want to be the champ, you got to beat the champ. But that was very disappointing to me.
For me, if it wasn't for the 2 knockdowns, the 2 scored knockdowns, I thought the first one was weak sauce, but okay. He landed a punch, dude's glove hit the canvas. It's a knockdown, no matter what you think.
It's a knockdown.
Yeah. Even though I thought he was just off balance, I didn't think he was actually hurt in any way, shape, form, or fashion. It's still a knockdown. So to me, without the 2 knockdowns, Diaz wins this fight. However, like you said, then they start reading the scorecards, and you're going, are you shitting me? Like, are you really telling me? Now, again, hats off to Nunez. First off, I want to say this before I even get into my tangent. Fight of the year contender. You know what I'm saying?
Without a doubt.
This was an absolute banger. The 12th round was ridiculous. I love it when dudes just start winging punches and saying, fuck it. Let me just try to get you the fuck out of here at this point, right? And for Nunez, for somebody who has 2 knockdowns in the fight, some people could say, oh, well, he could have tried to coast, the 12th round. He might have thought he had it in the bag because he had 2 knockdowns. He didn't do that, to his credit either, right? I want to say hats off to both these dudes. They came to fight, and that's exactly what the fuck they did. They fought. Diaz, though, I thought, especially early on, bro, he was controlling the action. I thought he had Nunez hurt, a couple of times. I think it was first and third. I think he had him hurt pretty decently with some good shots. He was able to punch in between.
He certainly got his attention.
Yeah, but then he got caught. You know what I'm saying? And it woke him. It was like, oh shit, hold on, wait a minute. This dude is the champ for a reason, right? So. And then it just turned into a great fight. But there's no way in hell. We're talking, like you said, 116, 110, 117.09, and 117.09 to 109. I guess if you're scoring the 2 knockdowns, maybe. You know what I'm saying?
Listen, but that's 9 rounds to 3. 117, 109 is 9 rounds to 3, and I thought Diaz won the 12th clean, and it felt like he was coming out to win that 12th round to kind of like make a closing statement of at least give me a chance in this one, because after all this action, I've been put down twice. I'm in with the biggest puncher in the division. I'm going to close the show and win this round, and I felt like he did it, and for me on my card made it a draw. And I just felt for him, man. I just felt for him that
even the rounds he got knocked down in, I thought he was winning the rounds.
And it speaks to Nunez's power that he can land a shot on a guy's shoulder and put him down. That's how dangerous of a puncher this guy is. He doesn't have to land clean to put you on your ass. But Diaz recovered. If there's any criticism of his performance, sometimes for me, he fights in bursts. And there's times where I wish he would be a little bit more consistent and make the rounds clearer, because the work he does is so clear. But then sometimes it seems like he's content to sit in that high guard and just take shots on the gloves and the arms. He's blocking a lot of it, but when you're in with a puncher like that, not only is that not the most effective thing, it doesn't look good. It just doesn't look good. And he's a durable guy, and so that's how he wanted to fight. But I think that he had the skill set to be a little more consistent and maybe at times, make Nunez really make him miss with nothing but air. And they're just some of those moments, it was like, all right, I felt like you won the round, but there's a lot of unanswered arm punches going on.
I hope that hopefully sometime down the line they get to run it back. I hope Diaz gets another shot against somebody and it goes his way this time, and they get to run this back because it was a great watch, right? Like it was, you know, especially again, like I said, when they got to the 12th round, I'm like, what am I watching right now? Like these dudes, this is high level just fighting. You know what I'm saying? And there were. I want to touch on that. It's and say that to your point, right? There was high level boxing throughout the whole fight.
Oh yeah.
That 12th round was just a fight. That was a
It also took them 3 rounds to get going, because they're both pretty smart. Obviously, Nunez has been very aggressive, but he's a more calculated aggressive. So it took them a minute to kind of feel each other out. Yeah, I hope Diaz gets another shot, man. It's going to be, it's tough. You start
and this was an
accumulating.
card top to bottom. There were some really good fights on this card altogether, but this one, the it was almost like thank you. Like usually you get a card where if the early action is good, then the main event's a dud. You know what I mean?
Like we had with
And
Yankee El Rivera a couple weeks ago.
oh my God, bro! But thank God these two guys got the message and said, no, no, we're gonna finish the night out. You hold our beer. We're gonna show you,
Yeah,
what a
yeah.
good fight is. And it was great, bro. Like uh, to your point earlier, you said you don't have a problem with the end result. It was the scoring I thought was way off, but at the end result, yeah, the Nunez won the fight. You got to give it. I don't have a problem with him getting the dub. I would have probably had it a draw, even with the two knockdowns, because I do think Diaz won more rounds than he lost. But at the same time, I can't be mad at it. Like, there are a couple rounds here or there. I'm like, all right, I can see it. But, again, it's another one of those fights where I'm like, shit, I'd really like to see these dudes again. Even though there were two knockdowns, I feel like this was a much more even
Well,
fight.
we
For
know for
first.
a fact we're not going to see a rematch immediately because after the fight they brought Emmanuel Navarrete into the ring, clearly promoting a future fight between Nunez and Navarrete, which I love that fight, man. I mean, I think that in more even more so than Oscar Valdez, this is the style matchup here that I think could deliver, a modern day Mexican classic.
Well, I mean, anytime Navarrete's fighting, you can sign me the fuck up, twice. I mean, win, lose, or draw, a Navarrete fight is going to be at least one thing entertaining, right? There's not going to be any dull moments in a Navarrete fight, hardly ever. So, and then watching Nunez fight, yeah, nah, go ahead and run that. They could have ran that right
How do
after
you
that.
see that one? How do you see that one? I'm having a hard time. I think I'm leaning Nunez just on his discipline and his conditioning and his work rate, but Navarrete has a way of taking guys and taking talented fighters and just making them uncomfortable. And
I would say it depends on what version of Navarrete shows up, right? Like if he takes it serious, but then again, like you said, even if he doesn't, he's got that. I don't know what it is about this punch he throws from Nogales, Mexico, but he throws this punch from way down south that you see coming a mile away and still lands it. I don't know how he does it or why people can't avoid it, but for some reason it lands and it usually makes people look stupid. So if he can land that punch, it doesn't really matter what I think. But at the end of the day, I think it depends on what version of him shows up.
that's I think bound to be a modern day classic. Bound to be.
Yeah, Let me put it this way: the only bet I'm willing to make on that fight is what you just said, is that it's going to be a classic fight. I don't know that I would be willing to put money on either fighter to win it, but I do know that I will put money on the fact that it's going to be an absolute banger.
What did you think of Pedro Guevara's draw with Alexis Molina? The commentary team seemed to feel like Molina won it. I felt like the draw was relatively appropriate, but a very impressive performance from Molina, who hadn't really fought at that level. And obviously Guevara, he's just been around forever, man. He's been relevant and fighting on undercards and main cards, for the last 15 years. Um, One of those guys that has a quality that, again, I think is always underrated, which is longevity. The ability to stay in this game and be at the top for, as long as he has been is very impressive.
I think it's he was fighting Curio, right? Adrian Curio. Um,
Nah, he fought Alexis Molina. It was a late replacement.
okay. Um, yeah, that's right. I thought he lost, in my opinion. I thought he lost the fight. Um, and I didn't think it was close. I thought, for my money, right, the more effective punches were coming from Molina, right? They were not coming from Guerrero. Had moments, but I think his moments were outshined by the fact that Molina was just the more consistent fighter throughout throughout the entire fight. And to me, that's one of the things where I look at the most is who was consistent throughout the whole thing, right? I thought Molina won, bro, and I thought I didn't think it was that close, in my opinion. I think Guevara got a gift with the draw.
Well, it was another one that was a
It was
hell
a
of a
good fight.
fight where
Yeah,
it was a great fight, much like Diaz and Nunez. It was one of those where, again, I had less of an issue with the draw, but it was one of those where it was like, it's too bad the judges weren't really watching this one, to really see that consistency from Molina that you're talking about.
but here's where I don't have a problem with it being a draw. I guess if I'm being you know whimsical, it was such a good fight where I'm like, all right, cool. Give
Yeah.
them a draw because they both put, I mean, they both put balls to the wall. They went out there and they gave us a great fight. It almost feels like you almost feel bad at the end of it that one of the guys has to lose, right? It's the Gotti Ward thing all over again. Why does anybody have to lose this fight? Like, can we just run it back again until somebody falls down and doesn't get back up? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what you kind of felt like. Hey, just let them keep going. I know it's scheduled for for 10. Let them go 15. Let's see who go. Let's see who falls down first. That's
Get a
almost kind
couple
of like
overtime rounds going.
yeah, yeah. Just let them keep going until somebody can't get back up because it was that good of a fight. Um, and even though I thought Guevara was in trouble a couple of times, just when you think, okay, he might be getting put out of here he comes right back, and then he lands some shit that you go, oh shit, is is he going to get Molina out of here? So it was a good back and forth fight. I do think Molina to me was the more consistent, so I had him winning. But it was a really great fight. Like, again, like I said, this undercard was these might not be household names to the average fan, but for boxing purists, this was great stuff, bro.
Oh, I mean, listen, the other guy I wanted to bring up too was Yoeli Mosqueda, who is the number 10 ranked guy at flyweight on BoxRec. Not a big name or of any kind, but clearly a high level operator. I was super impressed with him, man. I mean, he is a very, very sharp guy. And, with Bam leaving flyweight, Ken Shiro losing, there's been a little bit of a changing the guard here at flyweight in the last year or so. And I think that he's a problem for anybody at that weight right now.
Look, man, I think we're kind of in this renaissance where guys like Tank, guys like the Monster, guys like Junto, they're bringing a lot of attention to these smaller weight classes, right? And I think, thank God, because it used to be people only watched like welterweight and up, and then they kind of forgot about all the smaller weight classes, right? Now, when you look at it, some of our best fighters, and it's always kind of been this way, but some of our best, most marquee fights are those smaller weight classes. You know what I mean? The 140s, the 135s, the 130s. Now people are starting to pay attention to the 118s, the 120s, right? And we're going, hey, there's some stars literally, at our bottom weights all the way up until heavyweight. But I'm here to tell you, man, if you love high action, like really skillful high action fights, these lower weight classes, man, it's even the guys that are losing these fights are still world class fighters. You know what I'm saying?
Hey,
It's
listen,
high
I
level.
think arguably the most exciting fighter in American boxing right now is Bam Rodriguez, and he's a 115 pounder. I think that there's some trajectory that he's going to go up in weight, but that Bam Rodriguez is inherently a smaller weight fighter, and I think he's been a part of that excitement. I also think that the generation of guys just before this, Chocolatito being the big star, but you had Juan Francisco Rada, you had Sorong Vasai, you had Carlos Quadras, you had a crop of really talented guys that were all fighting each other frequently, helped put the lower divisions in a better place in terms of being able to carry a show.
Yeah, I mean, you even look at the Nonito Donairs of the world, Hawaiian Punch. I mean, the list goes on, bro. These smaller weight guys, they've been doing it for a long ass time, and now, just now, they're getting the love that they deserve. You mentioned Chocolatito. I mean, he'd been doing that shit, for fucking ever. But even the guys that are marquee names in boxing period right now, like the Tanks, like the Pacquiaos, right? They all started, you know, in these, 118, 120, 125, divisions, and now look at them.
Well, I got another great segue for you, Bub, and we apologize for any technical issues we're having this week. It is what it is. Sometimes that's just the name of the game, but we're sticking with you, and we appreciate you sticking with us. Um, Terrence Crawford started at lower weights. He started at 135 pounds, worked his way up, became undisputed at 140, went up to welterweight, and I would say, unfortunately, spent a lot of time in relative anonymity, right? Didn't always get the big fights. Finally gets the big fight with Errol and stands out as a true generational star. And since then, that fight being over 2 years ago, he's had one fight with Israel Madrimov at 154 pounds. That was very challenging, very close, very competitive. Madrimov is a high level operator. Now moving up two more weight classes to take on all time great Canelo Alvarez in what I would say is the biggest fight of the year so far. Um,
Mhm.
Man, we've had plenty of time to marinate this one, right? It's been signed for 6, 7 months already, and I've gone
Yeah.
back and forth every which way thinking about how this one's going to play out. But for me, after having already felt every different way about this fight, I've already felt like Crawford was going to give him a boxing lesson. I've already felt like Canelo was going to get a knockout in the first 4 rounds. I've been all the way on each way on the spectrum, but me personally, I'm not picking him, but I lean towards and favor Canelo because I don't view Crawford as a defensive wizard. I view him as a guy with a lot of gears. He's always got another gear he can go to, but a guy, particularly in the last few years, with how little he fights, has proven to be hittable, has proven to not be like infallible defensively. This is not a Mayweather. This is not a Rigondeaux. This is not a Lomachenko. And as great as Terrence is, I just think that Canelo Alvarez being an all-time great and them fighting this fight at his current weight, where he's had his undisputed run and gone on a run of historic proportion, it just seems like a big bite to chew on. And I personally think that Canelo, even if it's not by a knockout, I think Terrence Crawford's never been hit the way Canelo Alvarez is about to hit him, and in some way it's going to affect the dynamic of the fight.
Conventional wisdom would tell you that Canelo should win this fight, no matter how he does it, right? Conventional wisdom should tell you that. Considering one, the level of competition plus his size, he's been fighting at 168, majority of his later career, right? And then just look at him. Like, I don't think I've ever seen Canelo legitimately hurt in like what, 20 some odd fights, 30 some odd fights
Since Jose Cotto,
right?
when he
So
was young.
and he doesn't have a neck, you know what I mean? and since the Mayweather fight, his actual boxing skill is now like his defense is through the roof, right? He's gotten so much better as a boxer, and I think people kind of underplay that because of his come forward style, right? I said all that to say I'm taking Bud. I'm putting all my chips in on Bud, and the reason I say that is because Bud has underwhelmed us before, right? There's no secret to that. He's had some fights against some guys where we go, you shouldn't have had that many problems with this guy, right? But then when he has a point to prove, whenever he's had that fight where it's like, hey, I'm proving a point, he's made the point, every time. Every step, every weight class, he's had that I have to prove a point fight, and he shows out. Against Errol Spence, most people picked Errol Spence to wipe the floor with Bud Crawford. I want to again bring, I hate to keep bringing it up and be the guy that says I told you so, but I was the lone ITR member who said
You were?
nah.
You were.
But
Listen, I thought that Errol had the body of work that, and I still think that then that's why it's so impressive for Terrence. But I thought Errol's body of work at the time was more impressive. I had more proof that Errol was of a certain quality than I had that proof of Terrence. With Terrence, a lot of it was speculative because of who the competition was. Errol had all the names of his era outside of Thurman and Crawford. And so, and that's what that is what makes Terrence so special. And I think if you were to compare his legacy and his uh cumulative accomplishments with Canelo blows him out of the water, frankly. I mean, he's a multi-weight champion. He at one point went through every big name at 168 and took them down one by one and became undisputed in incredible fashion in that run from 2018 to 2022. He was just incredible. And when he fought Bivol, it was a big risk, much like Terrence is taking right now. Maybe less so than the risk that Terrence is taking, but it was a risk nonetheless. And he just didn't have the impact on Bivol the way he did at lower weights. And you could see at a certain point, he kind of came resigned to the fact that, like, I can't make an impact on this guy. And I think it's very possible that Terrence is going to have that moment too, even if he, is dictating the pace. If you watch, Canelo's fight with Amir Khan, obviously Amir, I think, dictated the tempo on that fight. But at some point, and Terrence has a much better chin than Amir, but at some point the power became a factor. And I'm interested to see what happens, when Terrence lands his very best shot on Canelo and it has no impact. Or if it has any impact. But frankly, I think with how him moving up 21 pounds, I think he's going to land a Sunday punch and the guy's going to be right there. And that's where we're going to see what Terrence is made of.
For all the heart I gave Amir Khan and all the kudos I gave him for taking that Canelo fight. God bless him. He's a beautiful boxer with no chin. Terrence Bud Crawford is a dog. Like, he's a dog. You can say whatever the hell it is you want about him. He's a dog. He's going to come in there. And even if he gets stopped, the only way I see him getting stopped is the referee. He gets knocked down and the referee waves it off. Like there's no way he gets knocked down and doesn't get back up. You know what I mean? Or unless they carry him out of there in a stretcher. I think that's the way it gets stopped. I think it goes 12 rounds. To be honest with you, no matter who wins, um, just because of the how much dog both guys have. I don't think Terrence is ever going to be able to hurt Canelo. I think you need a Mack truck at this point to hurt Canelo. Like, you know what I'm saying? He fought Bivol, who outboxed him and never got hurt. You know what I mean? He just couldn't
Yep.
win. And I think, but to that point, the times in which Canelo has had the biggest problems is with guys who can box and are not afraid to box him, right? When he's gotten in with guys that are afraid of what's coming back, that we saw that with Charlo. Charlo, skill wise, should have had all the skills to be able to give him fits, but he found out really quickly, like a lot of people were expecting Bud to, how hard he really hits, right? How hard Canelo really hits. Berlanga found it out early, and to his credit, made some adjustments to survive, right? But he wasn't just surviving; he was actively, you know, fighting back with Canelo. Did just enough to make it. Charlo just quite simply ran. You know what I mean? Bud's not
No,
going to do
no
that.
interest in engaging, and I don't expect Bud to have that kind of a performance. I just think that, and this was the turning point for me. Obviously, the inactivity from Terrence. We see Terrence every 16 months or so. I think at some point that catches up to every fighter. He's pushing 40, and this is a tough night to be in that position. But the other thing is, the guys like you said that Canelo has had the hardest time with are guys that are tough to hit because they're either slippery or they're movers. Lara, a straight mover, and Floyd obviously being the slipperiest guy to ever do it. Those are the styles in terms of tactical boxing that bother him. Quite frankly, Terrence is, I would say, a better offensive fighter than both of those guys, but he's so much more hittable. I think that the opportunities are going to be there for Canelo to land something big. And I don't see how it doesn't have an impact in this one.
I think he obviously. I mean, it's kind of hard to compare, against guys like Lara and Floyd. You know what I mean? But here's the thing with Lara and Floyd is there. A lot of people call them runners, but when you look at their style, especially against when you look at what they did against Canelo, is they were unhittable in front of him. Like they weren't running from him. He just couldn't hit them. I think he'll be able to touch Bud, but I think Bud's punch resistance is going to be better than what Canelo thinks it's going to be, right? Like Canelo's going to catch Bud, and then Bud is also going to be able to look at Canelo like Canelo looks at Bud when Bud catches him.
Yep.
Bud's going to stand there like, all right, cool. Now what? And then that's going to, I think that part is going to frustrate Canelo because he's used to dudes reacting a certain way when they get caught by him, right? We saw it against, when he fought Jaime. We saw it when he fought
He's
Berlanga.
used to getting a reaction.
Right. Bud's not going to give him that, even if he feels a certain way, right? Even if his knees want to buckle, they're not going to because I think Bud has that, physical control. And I don't know if you've seen his training videos. He's looking like a beast right now.
I have no doubt he's going
said,
to be a beast.
Every time I've wanted to pick against Bud, he's made a point, right? And the last time when we were doing this, and I will be honest, I'm not going to say that there I was also on the Spence train, and then me and Jack did an interview with a Hall of Fame boxer. Some of you might know him by the name of James Toney, and he told us before we started recording and during the interview that Bud was going to smoke Errol Spence. And even me and Jack were like, what? And then I said, but this dude's a Hall of Famer, right? He's been in with some of the best. I think I should pay attention to what he's saying. So I went back and I started watching some of Bud's fights. And I said, you know what? I'll be goddamn Everything he said and told us was true. And then I said, you know what? I'm picking Bud. God damn it, if the dude wasn't right. And he said what I'm telling you. Every time he's had to make a point, he's got in there and he's made it. So I'm not picking against him. I know Canelo has made me look foolish a couple of times for picking against him as well. I love Canelo. I am a full-fledged Canelo fan. I haven't always been a Bud fan, but I'm here to tell you right now, Terrence Burr Crawford wins this fight UD 12. And he
This
can
is
ride
part of what
and he can into the sunset afterwards.
this it's part of what makes this fight so interesting. This fight creates a level of intrigue that other fights that have athletic significance wouldn't, right? Because Terrence, obviously at 154, there's 15 guys he could take right now and make interesting fights, and I think that they would move the sport forward in a really good way. We just talked about Oslasi Iglesias and this new crop of guys at 168 that would be my first choice to see Canelo in with, but they're in with each other, and I think it's one of those fights that reaches across the table to the more casual fan and says, let your imagination run wild a little bit, because this isn't your traditional fight. And I think that's part of what makes it so exciting. And I'll definitely be tuned in next Saturday. I'll tell you what.
Win, lose, or draw, what does this do for you for Bud Crawford's legacy?
It's
Like if
it means way more for his legacy than for Canelo's, because he's the one that's taken that big risk. And largely, when you think about guys who take that risk, it doesn't go their way. You get Mikey Garcia and Errol Spence. You get Juan Manuel Marquez and Floyd Mayweather. There's I could run you a list of this not going well for guys, because it generally doesn't. There's weight classes for a reason. But I started thinking about, well, what's the most historical example of that playing out for the smaller fighter? And the best example I thought of was Bernard Hopkins moving from middleweight to light heavyweight, coming off 2 straight losses to Jermaine Taylor and smoking Antonio Tarver to become light heavyweight champion. And part of why that fight, if Antonio had won that fight, I think that's what a lot of people expected. He's the bigger guy. Bernard was 41, couple losses to a young buck. Everything was sort of in Antonio's direction, much the way that it is in Canelo's right now. And Bernard had a point to prove, and he proved that fucking point, much the way that you think that Terrence is going to. And when I think about examples of why Bernard Hopkins is such a legend, it's moments like that. It's moments where the deck is stacked against you, and sometimes Floyd didn't have to be in that position the way so many other greats do, because of his economic draw that other guys just didn't have. Those are the moments, Manny Pacquiao taking Antonio Margarito and permanently disfiguring his face and fucking up his eyesight. Those are the kinds of fights that I think that Terrence can look to say it can be done, and it's going to be a highlight point of my legacy.
you know what it reminds me of? It does. It reminds me of when Floyd fought De La Hoya, right? Floyd was a much smaller fighter. People don't. I think he had one or two fights at 147 at that point in his career, but he had been like a lifelong 135, 140 guy. And people forget he walks around to this day right around that weight. He's not a big dude at all, even when he's not fighting. Right? He's not a big guy. But he went up to De La Hoya's weight class, much unlike what Pacquiao did and make De La Hoya come down. He went up to De La Hoya's weight class when De La Hoya was the man in the sport, right? And then he gets that win. Now, I think Terrence can similarly pull something like that off, right? He's going up against a much bigger puncher, just like De La Hoya was a much bigger puncher than Floyd ever will be, right? I mean, that De La Hoya's left hook is still a thing of legend, right? You look at, I think really the only way Canelo can dismantle Bud is if he can get to that body, because Canelo's body punching is a thing of beauty. I love it. You know what I'm saying? If he can get to Bud's body, then he might be able to do some damage later in the fight. I don't think Bud will allow him to get there, but we'll see. But Canelo's obviously the much bigger puncher. He is the man in boxing right now, right? Um, Hands down. There's but I do think that Bud has everything he needs to be able to have that moment that you're talking about. The Bernard Hopkins moment, the Floyd moment, the Manny Pacquiao moment. I think he's got that in him, but we'll see. And I be honest with you, I'm with you. I think win, lose, or draw, Bud's gonna be able to retire, and people go, "Yo, that was one of them ones." And I think even if if everything goes the way people expect it to, and Canelo wins this, Canelo can retire and be like, "Yo, I fought fucking everybody. What do you want?"
Yeah. Yeah, and with Canelo, I would say there will be fewer stones left unturned than there were with Floyd. But that being said, I hope that some of these young guys at 168 get their crack at him, but he may be past that phase of his career and may be interested in taking challenging fights, but making sure that those are the ones that pay the most. But shit, bro, we have taken everybody across the world of boxing, man. We went to Sinaloa, Los Mochis, Mexico. We went to
We got to at least mention this. We got to at least mention it, just because it's fucking ridiculous. Tank and J. Paul.
well, okay. Let me just we took you from Sinaloa. We went to the UK for Pat McCormack. We went back to DC. We brought you the Pro Box card. We took you back to Vegas to tell you about Canelo and Crawford. All great fights, top tier boxing. But there's this sideshow going on, Nibs, that seems to be
I'm
getting
sorry, I put
the
you're my bad.
there's a sideshow going on, and it's taken up a little more attention from the kinds of things that we're talking about, and that is the announcement of Tyson and Mayweather doing an exhibition against each other, the most recent announcement of Jake Paul and Tank Davis doing an exhibition, which now there seems to be some controversy around that. I really hope that's not true. um I don't know what to make of fights like this anymore. They've become such a norm. And I feel like the argument that, well, this is good for regular boxing and it draws new fans, I feel like that's already kind of been disproven because it's not changing the viewership or the interest in championship level fights, but they keep happening. And I just, they've gone back all the way to Ali. Ali used to do, more showbiz type fights, we'll call them. Um, but I never know what to make of these anymore, brother, because they're not for us. They're really not for us. And I've had to learn to accept that as a boxing fan. We kind of keep the sport moving. And the fans are what keep the sport moving. And these aren't for us. These are not for us. And it can be frustrating.
I, I always, it's the old, saying, right? Is the juice worth the squeeze? I definitely, when it comes to Jake Paul versus Tank Davis, I I thought, like most people, this was going to be an exhibition fight. I'm hearing, or at least what the two sides are saying is that no, they're actually trying to get this fight a sanctioned fight that counts. I don't know who, what, when, where, or why anyone would sanction that. Tank Davis walks around. We're not talking about fights at. He walks around at maybe 145. You know what I mean? With his clothes on.
I think the very simple justification that people would give is that as much as Jake has now been in boxing for about 7 years, he still gets that kid glove approach where it's like, oh, he just started boxing, when he didn't just start boxing anymore. But they would say, oh, well, the skill and the experience difference is so big that the weight difference is what makes it even. I think that's what is implied. I think that's bullshit, but I think that's what they're trying to
There's
push.
there's weight classes for a reason, bro. Like, let's put it this way. Um, would you
It's
put
such a simple
Bruce Lee
fact,
in,
but people really do have to be reminded of it.
would you put Bruce Lee in against John Jones in an MMA fight? No. as great as we all know, not think know Bruce Lee is as a martial arts fighter, you wouldn't put him in against somebody who's a heavyweight and just as good, or even not even as good. Like even as no matter what you think of John Jones, he's nowhere near as skillful as Bruce Lee. But you wouldn't put them together. There's weight classes, bro. John Jones walks around 250. He might cut down to 225 for the fight, but Bruce Lee weighed a buck 35 soaking wet, bro.
Don't you think though, Nibs, don't you think
Come
though
on,
that
man.
this kind of plays into, in the same way that the difference in size with Canelo and Terrence, I think adds some mystique to the fight. Don't you think that's kind of what's going on here too, in a more exaggerated way?
But we're talking about a guy who has recently fought at 154, moving up to 168, right? 100 and you're talking about a 14-pound difference, right? As opposed to a 60-pound difference. It's well, actually, what a 65-pound difference because Jake fights at cruiserweight at 200, and Tank fights at 135. That's a 65-pound difference, my guy. That's like me fighting one of my sons. It wouldn't be close. You know what I mean? As young as my sons are, as much more skilled as they might be now, I'm still gonna whoop their ass. As fat and old as I am, it just is what it is, right? Your punches are not gonna hurt me like my punches are going to hurt you. My kid might land 10 punches on me. I just need one, right? And then he's going to sleep, and people are going to look at me like, why did you hit him like that? Did you not see the 10 punches he caught me with? You know what I'm saying? But it won't matter, bro. Like Tank Davis, yes, Tank Davis 1,000% better boxer than Jake Paul is. That goes without saying, right? There, there's no atmosphere in which you can put them in the same conversation as far as
But it's
skill
also,
goes.
I think it's also, Jake continuing to kind of push the boundaries of, not necessarily having to play by the same rules as other fighters and getting that like, oh, he just started treatment. He's still kind of playing off of that, I feel like.
The dude just fought, and again, no matter what you think of him and all his legal troubles and what kind of shit he's been in recently, he just fought Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Right? That is a legitimate boxer. The kid gloves are off now. No matter what we think of Jake Paul as far as the level of competition, guess what? He fought a dude who used to be a world champion.
But this all circles back to how I started this point. It's not for us, Nibs. Jake Paul is not concerned about what the diehard boxing fans think about him. He's interested in putting on a product that his fan base and his following will be drawn to. And I
And
believe he also
that was
loves,
okay for an exhibition.
right, right. Well, and hopefully it does, and I can only hope that Floyd and Tyson stays an exhibition, that doesn't become a controversy of any kind, because I don't what market is there going to be to watch Mike get in the ring, bro? Like I talk about one I don't understand, bro. It kind of breaks my heart a little bit that that's even a thing.
That was a little bit closer for me, and I still don't want to see it. I didn't want to see Mike fight. I don't ever want to see Mike fight again, right? Because
He
I think
can't
it's
do
just
it, bro. He can't pull the trigger. He's 60-year-old man.
now he's said in several interviews since the Jake Paul fight, he was paid to pull his punches. They paid him to not throw punches. And there were certain parts of the fight where you kind of felt like that might have been the case. He's come out and said it. He said, "Hey, look, they paid me to let this dude win, right? Especially early on in the fight." He said, "Now towards the end of the fight, yeah, he was just winded. You know what I mean?" But he said, "Yeah, earlier in the fight, they told me don't throw certain punches because they didn't want Jake Paul getting hurt." Um,
I would have to see that interview. I don't want to put out any kind of misinformation that there was a
he's got a
conspiracy.
couple out there on
Yeah,
you, and I think on YouTube now. He's got a couple. He's been talking
it wouldn't
lately
blow my mind.
because people were going hard on Tyson. about losing to Jake Paul. He, you know, Mike is, if nothing else, prideful. He had to come out and be like, hey, look, but when it comes to skill, you can kind of put Mike Tyson and Floyd Mayweather on the same platform, right? At one point in their careers, they were the baddest men on the planet, right? You couldn't beat them. But Floyd is still what? I don't think he's quite 50 yet. I think he's pushing 50. He's like 47, 48, some shit like that. Mike is retirement home age. Like, let's be really clear. I'm not
We're
saying that to
moving
be
into
funny.
we're moving into AARP category.
You feel me? And I'm saying that to be real. I'm not saying that to be funny, guys. I'm not talking shit against him. He's literally retirement age now, retirement home age now. Why? You know what I'm saying? It's like when I forget who Evander Holyfield fought, but he fought some dude he would have wiped the floor with. It was an MMA guy. I forget his name. Don't come for me in the comments. He would have, with his one arm behind his back and an eye closed, would have whooped the shit out of this dude and gets knocked out. Why? Because he's 150,000 years fucking old. Sometimes Father Time whoops your ass more than the person in the ring will. And I think that's what's happening with Mike Tyson. Um, Look, if I woke up and looked like Mike Tyson every day, I probably think I could whoop people's ass too. But the thing that gives me pause there is this is an exhibition. This is supposed to just be for fun, charity, for to get people to come out and have a good time. So that fight I don't have that big a problem with. It's just some old guys who just want to fuck around. Um, but Tank is in the prime of his career. Jake Paul is one of, whether we like it or not, one of the biggest draws in boxing right now. Tank
And
is outside
and
of Canelo, the biggest draw. He's the biggest draw in the lower weight classes, but outside of Canelo, you know what I
we haven't
mean?
even gotten to, I would say, my biggest issue with that exhibition taking place, which is that there's a guy named Lamont Roach, right? And he probably just beat Tank. And now the boxing, the non-boxing world, right, who may not be aware of people like Lamont Roach or aware of the fact that Tank just had a life and death type of fight, they don't even care that
Mm,
it's not happening. And here's Lamont,
yeah.
getting thrown out in the cold again. And that's the part for me that really bothers me is there's a guy that it's not like Tank is short on uh great fights that he could make and this was the best thing. No, there's a guy that deserves his rematch. Really deserves his rematch. And he's not going to get it. He's going to have to sit there and watch this shit. You know what I mean? And I hate that.
I'm pretty sure they'll give him a paycheck, but ultimately that's what this comes down to is money, right? You look at the guarantee they were talking about paying Tank to fight Jake Paul, and then you understand, like whether you like it or not, the amount of money that I've heard, and I can't confirm it, so I'm not going to say what the dollar amount is, because I can't confirm that's true or not. But if the dollar amount that's been thrown out there is anywhere close to being true, I'm like, well, shit. It'd be hard for anybody. I don't give a fuck how much you love a sport. You know what I mean? It'd be hard for anybody to turn down that kind of money.
It's just sort of compounded to where I think as great as Tank is, the talent has been undeniable. I think the desire to create a real boxing legacy just hasn't always been there. And if that's the thing that's been lacking for you with Tank Davis, this just sort of seals the deal that legacy is not of utmost importance to him. That the
He
check
was talking
clearing,
about retiring before the Rolly fight.
right?
Like,
Yeah. So, listen, those fights are going to happen. They are what they are. We're going to keep doing our thing, bringing you recaps of world class boxing and televised boxing all across the world. Nibs, we watched a great local following show up in Los Mochis, Mexico for Eduardo Nunez and that has ultimately carried him to a world title and now to his first hometown defense, which will then lead to a mega fight with Emmanuel Navarrete. But it all started with that local support. And as is tradition, we always close the show by speaking on the importance of supporting local boxing.
yeah, man, I think it's we touched on the last time we were on about, you know, supporting local boxing isn't just as important for the guys that are going to be professional boxers. It's supporting local boxing because there are boxing gyms that provide a service that goes beyond just guys who are actually trying to make it. It provides a service for guys that are going to make it in professionally in other ways of life. But I want to say that, and that's the real reason why you should support local boxing. Let me be very clear, because local boxing gyms, local boxing sanctioning bodies, these local fights that you see at your high school baseball field or in some local gym, those are the fights that are most meaningful because they provide guys who are looking for a way to provide for their families or themselves or just build themselves up a great avenue to do so, and they cannot exist without the support of their communities. But then out of those, every now and again you get a diamond in the rough, right? You get a Floyd Mayweather, you get a Manny Pacquiao. Those stories have been told a million times. You get a Roberto Duran, right? A guy who was literally abandoned as a child, works his way up and becomes, yeah, a lot of people know him for the No Mas, but he becomes one of the greatest fighters of all time. But how did he do it? Right? Somebody somewhere supported him at a local level. Somebody gave him, boxing shoes. The kid couldn't afford regular shoes. So, somebody paid for him to have boxing shoes, gave him some boxing gloves, gave him a place to stay. That's the support we're talking about that does happen. But then people started showing up. Hey, who's that Roberto? Who's that Duran kid? Let's go watch it. Now look at who he is now, right? And we could, those kind of stories you could tell a million times over in the sport of boxing, but they do not happen if the people within your community, your next door neighbor, the guy who works at your high school, the person who picks up your trash, aren't all going to watch these fights and support you and show up when nobody knows who the fuck you are. That's what this is about. It's about showing pride in your community. That's why some of the biggest names come from the East Coast because, hey, let's face it, nobody supports each other like, the East Coast does. New York, Boston, Chicago, those Midwest areas, you know. And I'll even say, California, LA, they show up for their people. Mexico, I mean, look, you can't say to this day, you can't go to Mexico and say anything bad about Julio Cesar Chavez. Let me tell you something right now. Unless you, especially if you're trying to make it back home, you, look, you end up some kind of way. But that's the support we're talking about. These got the people who support you. Don't forget, right? Julio Cesar Chavez ain't fought in how many years? People in Mexico still love this man. Show not, and then for those who get the support, should put that interest right back into your community as well. We talk about supporting, but when you get the support, you have to put it back. If you're not supporting local boxing, you're not supporting yourself. What the fuck are you doing?
Beautifully said, my friend. Hell of a show this week. And we will be back next week after Canelo and Crawford going forward. We will be on Mondays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And we look forward to being back with you. See you next week, brother.
See you back next week. Hey, you guys go check out that slip and weave and go check out, Dakota's work that he's doing with those fight lives. I'm trying to tell you, man, it's life changing stuff. If you love boxing, go check him out.
Fight Life with Mio Yoshida coming soon.